Welcome back to I Take Your Point with your hosts, John and Lynn. In this segment, we're digging into a tough but necessary topic, violence in America, how we got here and what it means for us right now. Make sure you tune in to the end of the episode to hear John answer the big question, so what's the point? And we would love to hear from you too, so drop your thoughts in the comments and join the conversation.
Let's talk about violence in America. And we have to start with what has transpired, not just this week, but we have to think about it with respect to why it is that America finds itself where it is. We can no longer have political discourse or even random discourse, it seems, in this country without it being something different or turning into something different. It feels like we are all clashing about something. We can't be a Republican. We can't be a Democrat. It used to be that if you were a Republican, it did not define all of who you are or were. If you were a Democrat, it did not define all of who you are or were. It was just a part of who you are or were. Now we see it tearing apart families, friendships, businesses, and relationships that were 20, 30, 40 years old. I'm always fascinated when we think about America at this point, how we got here, and more importantly, what we're going to do to try to make certain that we're able to move forward. Looking at the scenes of last week, one of the things that jumped out to me with respect to America, violence and politics specifically, was you go back to probably 07, 08. And the election of Barack Hussein Obama, and how that election, in my opinion, broke a good portion of America. Because in theory, America was supposed to be this melting pot where everyone could put aside their ideologies and vote for the most qualified candidate, regardless of whether or not that candidate was a Republican or Democrat. But Obama tested that. He tested what some progressives considered to be their ideologies, that they would look at individuals for who it is that they say they were. It tested some Republicans from the standpoint that they started looking and really questioning what qualified in their mind was, and whether or not qualified, you could be qualified if you were not a cis white male. And so everyone that fell outside of that circle was deemed unqualified. And I think the first time that I saw it on display was, we go back to the great state of South Carolina. And I believe Representative Joe, I can't remember his name, he was a representative from South Carolina. And I remember Obama was given the State of the Union address and he yelled out, "You lie." And you had that happen on the floor of the House of Representatives. And then you had the Tea Party and individuals in the Tea Party who were talking about taking our country back and things of that sort. One could not associate the play on words, they're taking our country back, especially when the person who they were talking about taking it back from was an individual who looked different from them. So you talk about that toxic polarization in terms of rhetoric and in terms of actions on one side. Republicans can say that that's also happened on the left, where Dems or progressives or liberals, however you want to identify yourself, were also using words that were insightful. And so let's start there. What say you about that?
And the representative that you were referring to is Joe Wilson, from apparently your great state of South Carolina, which again is debatable, but we will hold that off. So I think that when you think about Joe Wilson and the other people in Congress that were so disrespectful to Obama, and we hadn't seen that before. Like, I remember when Bush was president, and a coworker and I had traveled to Germany, and it was right after 9/11. And so he was talking about Angela Merkel, and then he made some derogatory remarks about Bush. And neither my coworker or myself voted for Bush. We were not fans of Bush. But what we did say is, that is our president. No matter what, we're American, that's our president, and that's disrespectful. And so I just remember that there was this pride in being an American and not Democrat or Republican or whatever. And I do have to agree with you that at some point, and maybe it was Obama, it became more about identity, that if you are a Democrat, you are these things. If you are a Republican, you are these things. Not that this particular candidate aligned with certain parts of me and I'm going to vote this way. It just became, that's who you are and that's how I'm going to label you. We go back to those labels. There was no room for nuance. There was no room for discord. There was no room for anything. I'm going to keep on going back to the media. I believe that the media found a niche and they were like, you know what, we can monetize this. And so we're going to exploit it. We're going to put on people that are not just telling them to forget Dan Rathers and Peter Jennings. Those are gone. We're going to go and put in people that are, say, incendiary things, that are inciting things, that are making people move with emotion instead of thought. You talked about that Obama was unqualified. Of course, we know Obama is qualified. Everybody that can read knows on paper he is qualified. Of course that. But society moved from logical thinking and conversation to emotion. And when you start to operate on emotion and you're looking at that reptilian brain, there is no room for you to have any type of conversation that's going to invite something in that doesn't align with what you, like your confirmation bias or whatever you're thinking. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. I want to stay on the politics of the word usage, because one of the things that we have noticed over the last couple of years, that when you disagree with someone and you start throwing around terms such as evil, fascist, communist, things of that sort, and the individual who is now sitting in the White House has mastered those words to help demonize individuals that he doesn't agree with. So we become very tribal in terms of our political views. We do have individuals who specifically just identify that their politics is their primary identity. Everything else is secondary. And it used not be that way, or at least we didn't allow it to be to the degree that it is now, where everyone is doing it. So that violent language that is utilized, words can only get you to a certain point. After you've said certain things and you put it out there, the next logical step is the physical violence. And so when you have events that happened with respect to violence in the political sphere, we see an uptick of violence, not only perpetrated against individuals who are public figures, but now individuals who are going about their day-to-day lives. One of the things that CNN did, I believe it was today or yesterday, they dropped an article that talked about the increase in terms of political violence when individuals disagree with what it is that an individual may be saying or believing. And we can go back to the first assassination attempts against the shit show. And, during that time, it was obviously running for re-election. We can also go back and talk about earlier this year, where you had Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania have a Molotov cocktail thrown at his house. Then we can talk about the representatives from Minnesota who were killed a couple months ago. They happen to be Democrats. We can talk about the individual who went in to United Healthcare and decided that he was going to gun down the CEO of United Healthcare. I take your point about the media, and we'll put on that for a couple of minutes, because I want to talk about how the media glorifies certain things. This week, we saw the assassination of Charlie Kirk as he was on a college campus giving a speech about his views. It seems to me that we're living in this moment where we are now transcending words, and we are now seeing in action individuals decide that they're going to commit violent acts against individuals who may disagree with them. We would be remiss if we did not point out what happened on January 6th and that event, and how those individuals who were adjudicated and found guilty of trying to overthrow their government, and the individual who's sitting now in the office of the presidency of the United States, decided that he was going to pardon them and call them patriots. So that violence and those violent acts that we're seeing, all of it seems to have ratcheted up since 2010. We'd be foolish not to see the throughput of what happened in 2008 and where we are now, almost 20 years later.
Yeah, and so I do go back to the emotional responses. So they're twofold. First, if you use words to demonize like a group of people, then you can justify your action because you're essentially dehumanizing them. And the other thing about that is that when you are operating with emotion and you're not using that like the neurocortex of your brain, you're not doing higher order thinking, questioning, being receptive to input. When you just operate in emotion, the next step is going to be violence. What I see is a lot of political people, a lot of the media, a lot of society society is monetizing, and they're making a lot of money off of these words, using inflammatory rhetoric, get people to operate in a way where they're not thinking. They're not thinking about the throughput. The only people that are benefiting from that are the people that are using those words, not the people that shoot someone and then go to jail. Not the people that are throwing cocktails at people and, it upends their life. So the people that maybe sit in the Oval Office or sit in a media room that are allowing this rhetoric to continue, they keep profiting off of it. And no one is questioning it. They're just continuing to move in this direction instead of having a conversation about, well, let me hear you. Because not everything that somebody says, even if they disagree with you, is wrong. It's their perspective. And I think that we can make space to hear someone else's perspective. It may not change a dang thing about me. I may not change anything, but I can still give you the space and the grace for you to say what you have to say, because there is a reason why somebody says something. One of the things that you and I talked about were Gen Z, right? And so I'm always, yay, Gen Z. But there is this group of Gen Z, these angry white males. And I'm like, why are you so angry? So I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and she talked about because their legacy, they feel like their legacy is being taken away from them. And the funny thing about, not funny, haha, but funny, interesting way is that people will look at something someone says, like a Charlie Kirk, and they'll like, oh my God, I align with this. But they never think about his background. They never think about anything else. It was one soundbite, and they're like, my goodness, I must follow this person. You never take the time to understand how he got here, what his life is like. It may not align with you at all, but one soundbite, confirmation bias.
Yeah, I think you brought up two things that are interesting in terms of how we got here. One is the collapse of trust in terms of Gen Z not necessarily believing in the system and what it is and how it is that the system is currently set up to protect them, or they may disagree about how the system is structured, and they've lost trust or faith in the American political system in and of itself. The second part that you mentioned was individuals who can find someone who they agree with and latch on to that core component of what it is that they believe that they've heard from that individual. I think those two things, when you combine trust or lack of trust with, and I'm going to use technology here, with that radicalization with respect to online technology, and you finding your tribe of individuals who may agree with you, that I believe has been like an accelerant for us in this day, because I can get online and I can find individuals who hate certain things or who believe a certain way. In the past, I may not have been able to find those individuals. I may have thought I was a weirdo sitting here thinking that, okay, I'm the only one that thinks this way. But now I have little subgroups or social ecosystems that will allow me to speak to like-minded evangelists, and we can all talk about how it is that the man, or how it is that, Black folk or gay folk or Jewish folk are all burdening us and taking things away from us. You talked about individuals feeling that their legacy was at stake. And specifically, we're talking about white males, because I think the data does show that when you think about the vast majority of mass shootings that occur in the United States, the data shows that 55% of those mass shootings are committed by folk who are white. The data also shows that a large percentage of those are white men between the ages of 22 and 34, early 30s. So the question then becomes, why are they so angry?
I think that we, and I always talk about the collective, we kind of encourage this, and I always go back to COVID. I think that people think COVID happened, COVID's over, but there are ramifications from COVID. And so we think about 2 years, these kiddos were stuck online and they felt isolated. With a Google search, keyword search, some metadata, I can find like-minded people. If I'm not going out and I'm not hearing from other people in a classroom, or I'm not traveling to be exposed to new things, all I'm hearing is something that's reinforced to me over and over and over. And I know that sometimes you will say, like, it's the parents. The parents were also going through their own thing during COVID. So if I had my kiddo in a room and he or she was in a room for 2 hours and all they were doing was keyword searching and finding their like-minded people, that's all they heard. They weren't challenged. And I have this thing about either you need to go to college or you need to travel. You have options. Those are your two options. You can't just stay in Dillon, South Carolina and just do whatever you're doing there. I don't know what you're doing. Or Enid, Oklahoma. You can't do it. And so I think that it's more about exposing people to different ideas. And when they were going through COVID, and like I said, they found their echo chamber, that just became their truth. That became
Here's where I'm going to push back on that,
okay.
because this is a uniquely American problem. Yes, you do not see the number of mass shootings with young folk in other countries that you see in America. Other countries dealt with COVID.
Let me just challenge you and ask you for some, data. How many other countries have access to the firearms that we have?
And that's the point that I wanted to get to. Thank you for making my point for me before I got a chance to.
Because sometimes I can make it better than you.
Nice. Well played. I think when you add in everything that America does well, the one thing that we do well is apparently kill folk. And we do well in terms of making certain that individuals have access to firearms. And so by making certain that individuals have firearms at the ready and can get as many as they want and can have an open carry to carry them wherever and however they choose to, then we create situations that lead to the violence that we are seeing. Thank you for joining a lively discussion on our violence in politics. Folks, it feels like America is at a breaking point. But what's really tearing us apart are some bad actors, individuals who should know better, who are using our differences as a wedge. And sadly, a lot of us are allowing them to. And so where do we find ourselves? And what is the point? The point is we have to be able to have disagreements without it turning into violence. These things are becoming dangerous. We're seeing it on the left. We're seeing it on the right. We're no longer able to have civil discussions. It used to be that you were a Republican or a Democrat, but you're also other things. But now we identify ourselves and we surround ourselves with individuals who typically think like we do. And that creates echo chambers. We're talking past each other and not to each other. And that's a part of the problem. When we look at the things that are fostering violence in our politics, we have to take in consideration our history. The fact that we have such a history of violence in this country, and that violence oftentimes has led us to some very, very dark places, but we've come through them. And in some ways, we've become a better nation because of it. But when we talk about the toxic polarization in terms of how it is that we speak with one another, we talk about the broken system in terms of individuals not being able to trust that their votes matter. And then you combine that with the presence of social media and individuals able to find tribes that believe and think like them. Those are all separate problems, but they're all a part of the core problem that is America. And it's causing us to spiral out of control. And so we have to address it, folk. We're at a dangerous moment right now. And our divisions are real. The decay of our institutions is measurable. And the digital forces that are flaming those differences are getting more amplified. Nothing that we talked about today has an easy fix. They're complex and they're deep-rooted challenges. And they're going to require some serious national soul searching. But recognizing these forces is the first step. As I said, naming them, understanding how they work together, and seeing how they affect our own lives is essential. So while you're out this week, take the time to do something nice for yourself. And while you're at it, make the time to do something nice for someone else. Until next time, we'll talk to you.
Thanks for tuning in to another lively conversation on I Take Your Point. This podcast is a production of the SME LLC Media Group. All rights reserved. If you are enjoying the show, hit the subscribe button in the top right corner. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and check out past episodes. Until next time, take care and be well.